Okay, so you're in Kaiserslautern, you've met Gerlinda,
Yeah.
and then tell me about when you first made your way to Erfenbach and the circumstances around going there for the first time and meeting Richard and Amalia, her parents.
Well, I can't remember exactly the first time, but obviously there was some point at which I was invited out there. And it was a bus ride
Yeah.
up to Offenbach. And yeah, and of course, there's a lot of family up there.
Mm-hmm. A lot of cousins and
Cousins, yeah. I don't know that I met them all.
No. What impressions did Richard make on you? Was it a good impression or?
Oh, yeah, no, he was a good man.
Yeah.
Oh, I remember their dog, a shepherd.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think he was a bit touchy, the dog.
Mm. And at this point, because your German was fairly good, you could communicate
Yeah.
quite comfortably with Amalia and Richard.
Yes.
Did he ever talk to you about his experiences during the war?
Yes.
Oh, he did?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you recall about anything that struck you about his experience?
Well, he was on the Eastern Front,
Yeah.
and I guess not too pleasant.
No.
Yeah, I don't remember anything in particular.
No. But was it something, did you sense that it was a part of who he was? He really,
Well, no, I think it was just like everybody. He had his life in Erfenbach, and that was a diversion for
Yeah.
a few years. I remember there was talk that, I think he was must have been in Munich or somewhere, and she had the opportunity of going down to visit him and didn't go.
she as in Amalia?
Amalia, yeah.
Okay.
Didn't go, and as I recall, she was afraid of, she hadn't been on trains before.
Right.
Was afraid to go. Yeah.
And then what about Amalia? What impressions did she seemed pretty quiet from what I recall.
Yes. And she was very quiet.
Just have memories of her cooking, always cooking.
Yeah.
So coming back, so you get married,
56.
1956. And then from there you come back to the States. What are the steps then?
Well, we, for one thing, we managed to get a flight from Frankfurt to New York.
Right.
And then it took a couple of days for me to get processed there. And then we got a train and went all the way to Seattle.
Hmm. Now, how did your mother feel about you marrying a German? Was there a bit of awkwardness there, or did?
Well, partly maybe because of the language, but no, otherwise not really.
No. Okay.
I remember my mother organized an evening, and took Yolanda down and bought her a dress that she thought would be appropriate for the evening. And yeah, she lived on 11th Northeast at that time, had a house.
Is that the house she lived in all for the rest of her life? Because
No,
okay, this is,
no. And there was an apartment actually in the basement.
right,
And so Gerlinda and I moved into that apartment.
okay.
And then I went looking for work and found a job at a bank as a teller. And yes, and then I decided I should go back to school.
Mhm.
And I think it was reading I had done while I was in Germany that led me to pick psychology instead of business administration.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, I should get a job in the university district to get me through school.
Right.
And went around, got a job at Hartman's Books, which turned out to be the best job I ever had.
Oh, great.
The manager's name was Bill Kimball, and I think he had been manager of the university bookstore, and but he was really good to work with. I was in the shipping and receiving department. I was
You
the
were.
shipping and receiving department.
So the logic there was that you would have a job that would be close to university,
Yeah,
so that when you went geographically, it would be convenient.
yeah. At some point, we decided to move out and get a place of our own.
Right.
And we did, we got a place well, just off of 45th Street, but within walking distance of the university. And then we moved from there to a place on University Way, which is what got us into student housing, because we met a student pair living next door, and they were expecting their first child,
Mhm.
and got into student housing. And so we decided we would apply for student housing too.
Right.
And I think Rick was coming along, that would have been 1959. And yeah.
And was that where you met Jerry and Renata?
Yes,
Yeah,
when we
okay.
went to visit Mel and Cora Lee. Cora Lee, while we were there, Cora Lee said, "Oh, there's a German girl next door. I'll go see if she's home." And she was. It was Renata. And so that's when we met Renata.
Mhm.
That would have been in the summer of '59.
Okay. So she would have, so both Renata and Gerlinda were pregnant.
Well,
At that
Renata was, I think she had Richard
Okay.
already. He was born in April.
Right.
And our Richard was on his way.
Mhm. So you're
Yeah.
you're working in the bookstore.
So I'm working in the
You're going to
bookstore.
the University of
Yeah.
Washington.
And I worked pretty well. I calculated, it was 33 hours a week. And when I finished up with the chores in the shipping and receiving, I worked on the floor.
Right.
And selling books. And which I enjoyed.
Now, wasn't there an incident where you met very briefly, albeit Allen Ginsberg? Didn't he run into this?
Oh, yeah, he came, he was reading poetry somewhere.
Right, of
And
course.
he came into the bookstore and wanted to know where it was.
Where the reading was?
Yeah.
Okay.
And we had a poster on the wall, so he got his information, he got back in his cab and went on.
Huh.
Yeah,
Oh, you mean he came in to find out where he was giving?
That's right.
The location of?
yeah.
Was he was he quite animated, a character? Do you remember?
Yeah, he was. Yeah, he was animated. He was. I remember he was dressed in a tuxedo. But anyway, that was just a few moments.
A brief moment, yes. Yeah. Interesting. So you finish your degree in what year? And
59.
59, and that was a psychology degree.
Yeah. And then I stayed on for a master's, which I got in 60, and then stayed on for a PhD, which I got in 1962. But when
And all of those three components were from the University of Washington?
That's right.
Yeah.
And I had a chance to get a job in the pharmacology department of medical school when I finished my bachelor's degree.
In 59, yeah.
59. So I quit the books and went to pharmacology.
Mm-hmm.
And then worked there for, well, I don't know, at some point I got a fellowship, and so I didn't have to work, so I didn't have to work. And that was interesting because I found that it very hard to get myself organized, because when I was busy, all the time, I worked, 20, 30 hours a week and going to school full time. I had to do things without putting them off. Suddenly I didn't have any of these constraints.
You lost momentum.
Yeah, lost control.
So, 62, you're done. Now, at what point, you were telling me once about doing some statistical analysis, was it? Where they were experimenting with drugs?
Yeah.
Tell me about that. That's interesting, the circumstances around.
Well, a couple of things happened in the pharmacology department. One, we did one study on an analgesic, and we had to have a pain stimulus, and so we went to the physiotherapy department and got one of these things that beam. If it's intense enough, it's painful.
Right.
So we used that, and we used aspirin, and then the tested drug, and codeine, and a placebo. And so we used medical students or subjects. I think they got paid $60 or $70, and they went through all 4 conditions, and then we analyzed. Oh yes, and the other thing we did more routinely was there were drug trials at that time. People in institutions could be used for drug trials. And we would just get the data and analyze it. And, but there was, the other thing was that before I had got there, they had done some work on LSD, and I guess it went haywire. And now we had psilocybin. And they were reluctant to try it on human subjects because of the experience they had with the LSD. So they were giving it to cats. And it was kind of pathetic because they would end up with what we called hind-end ataxia. That is, they were basically temporarily paralyzed from the middle of their back down.
Right.
And so these cats would be dragging themselves, you know,
Oh
around
dear.
cages, and it was pathetic.
Right.
Didn't learn a damn thing.
And then, yeah, I was just going to say, the thinking was that LSD, psilocybin, codeine, all these things were kind of seen in the same context of each other in terms of experimentation as to how they could remedy certain physical and mental ailments, or?
Well, we were in psychopharmacology.
Right.
And so we were looking for behavioral effects.
Okay.
And then it turned out that somebody in the pediatric department wanted to do some work on monkeys, and I don't know how I got it, but I got the job. And this was, what he wanted to do was to repeat the work of Harry Harlow at the University of Wisconsin on mother-infant relationships, and but with real monkeys.
Mm-hmm.
Harlow had used baby monkeys, but he used artificial mothers.
Mm-hmm.
And this guy thought, well, let's see if we can repeat this with real mothers. And so we got some pigtail macaques from Washington State University who had babies, and actually the focus of the work was more on the mother
Mm-hmm.
than on the infants, and the effect of separation.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, but separating them was quite a chore. These are pretty fierce animals. And it took two people. One would have to hold the mother, and the other one would have to take the baby off of her. She didn't like that very much. I remember one time I was alone, and I went down the hallway to a class and just see if I could find somebody who would be willing to come and give me a hand, and I did. And so I held the mother, and this guy took, on my instruction, took the infant off. But then the mother got away and went after him, and no bruises or injuries. As soon as she got the baby back, it was okay.
Yeah.
But I remember him saying, "I'm never going to do that again."
So was that during, while you're doing your master's and PhD, that
Yeah.
period when you were,
Yeah,
okay.
I was a grad student.
So that's how you earned a little bit of income while
Yeah,
you were
yeah.
a student?
If I wasn't, I mean, toward the end, I think the last year of PhD I had a fellowship, or maybe the last 2 years, I'm not sure. But otherwise I was working.
Right.
You know.
And then upon completion in '62, where?
Well, okay, what happened there was that there was a job at the University of Oregon
Mhm.
that I thought was in the bag. And then I got a phone call from somebody at the University of South Dakota asking me if I would be interested in a job there. And it turned out that the person at the University of South Dakota, well, I should say that the job at the University of Oregon was what was called a soft money job. It was a research grant.
Okay.
And it had to do with primates. And this guy was going to go and do that from South Dakota. And he had a primate colony,
Mm.
and I had this experience with primates. So he was looking for somebody like that.
To take over his job in South Dakota,
South
so he
Dakota,
could
yeah.
go to Oregon.
That's right,
Yeah.
for a year.
Yeah,
And with the possibility these things always can turn into something permanent.
of course.
So I said, yeah, I'll come out. I did, and I got the job. And by this time, we had 2 children.
Mm-hmm.
And so we packed up and camped across the country. Went to South Dakota and actually moved into that man's house
Okay.
and stayed there.
And I know I've got pictures of Amalia and Richard. They must have come to visit you while you were in
That's right.
South Dakota, because I've got
Yes.
photographs.
Yeah. And then we took a trip out west to what was Montana, and it was mainly Montana.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, tell me about the circumstances that I believe next lead you to Victoria. How that
Well,
comes about.
okay, what happened was, so we were there a year at South Dakota. I was pretty sure I didn't want to stay
Mhm.
there. I mean, there were good people to work with, and it was a good job, and I probably could have stayed. But spent the rest of my life in South Dakota, but I really wanted to get back out west. And so I found a job at Idaho State. And I thought, well, that's on the way. So I took that, and that turned out to be a real loser. Idaho State is in Pocatello, the southern part of Idaho, bordering on Utah. And population was very, very Mormon.
Mm-hmm.
And I discovered something about the Mormons, and that is they all want their kids to have university degrees, but they don't want them to learn anything. So it creates a rather strange situation. And I had received a research grant to do some work on some chickens. And so there was a building where the chemistry department had been at Idaho State that was abandoned, and so I was given space in that building. And so I was able to complete that. But then I had decided fairly quickly that I didn't want to stay in Idaho State.
Mm-hmm.
And then I saw this job at University of Victoria. So I wrote and was invited up for an interview. That was during the Easter break in 1964.
Mm-hmm.
And remember we took the time off and drove to Seattle.
So the whole family came with you
Yeah.
at that point, okay?
And then I drove to Port Angeles, took the ferry over and was met here.
And that would have been the coho.
Yeah.
Even back then.
Spent the day here, talking to, Bill Gaddis, who was the chairman of the department.
Mm-hmm.
And
And it was a brand new university. I mean,
it was brand new, just become a university that
Right.
year in 64, or 63, I guess.
Now, had you been in Victoria before? I think you'd said as a child you'd come here.
Yeah, when I was 12 or so, we came over and had tea at the Empress and went back, but I don't think the Coho was running at that time. That was in
No.
1947, so
Oh, okay, no.
it was a different ship.
Do you remember your first impressions of Victoria?
Yeah, but what I remember is the inside of the Empress Hotel, and how over the years it never seemed to change.
Right.
It was the same as in 1947. Yeah, I guess it's changed now, but.
Mhm. So in '64, when you came up, so you were interviewed for the position.
Yeah.
Did you feel like you really wanted this job even before you? Was there a sense that geographically it was ideal with Mum in Seattle and,
Yeah,
Was that-
no, it seemed a pretty good deal. And I always thought that it would be nice to be in a small school, and it was small at
Yeah.
that time. And, yeah, so I think from the beginning, I knew I liked the job, and I did like the job, and I liked the people, and yeah.
so with it being a new university, then all the professors, did some of them come from Victoria College, was it, or
Yeah.
before?
Yeah,
They sort of migrated over?
well, like the chair of the department, Bill Gaddis,
And this is the chair of the psychology department?
yes, psychology department. He, like many, was teaching there without a doctorate.
Mm.
But I guess when they became a university, they decided they should get doctorates, and so he went down to school in California and got a doctorate at Claremont.
Mhm.
And, yeah, what track were we on?
Well, we talked about just the impressions of Victoria. Were there people, specific individuals, other than Gaddis, that you gravitated towards in your early part of your career that you connected with, that you recall?
Well, yeah, the person who met me at the ferry was Lex Milton. And, yeah, he stayed a pretty good friend, and then Otfrid Spring, and
Mhm.
came here a couple of years later.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then Dick May would have been there as
Yeah,
well?
Dick May came.
Yeah. Huh.
Yeah. But when we first moved here, we lived on Cedar Hill Road,
Mhm.
and then bought a house on Blair.
Blair, yeah.
Yeah.
And it was from Blair where you had taken the job in Heidelberg, correct?
Yeah.
That's not, what were the circumstances around
Well, I
that?
was getting a sabbatical leave. I'd been here for 6 years, and the 7th year you get off. And
Is that a year off with pay or
no,
No.
pay.
no pay?
Oh, no, partial pay.
Okay.
Yeah. And yeah, I was kind of looking for, I had been engaged in comparative psychology,
Mhm.
and I thought, well, I'd really like to do something else. So I was looking at various possibilities, and I chose Heidelberg because the head of the department there, whose name I can't remember right now, had written a couple of books on phenomenology and psychology, and I thought, well, this is interesting. I should go and learn something about phenomenology. And so that was the reason for the choice. And
So you sold Blair,
sold Blair.
and then you moved into those duplexes on Shelburne. Was that when we came back or when we were going?
Going.
When we were going,
Yeah.
right?
Well, that's because when we put the house up for sale, we didn't expect it to go so fast.
Right.
And the guy who bought it wanted it the next month, so
Oh, dear.
we had to go find something temporary. And those places had just been built
Yeah.
and were available. Yeah.
And that's why I went to Jiminy Cricket's and was because it was right next to those duplexes, what I recall.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, because I remember that. So we were there for just a couple of months,
Yeah,
yeah? And then off we go to Heidelberg.
yeah.
And was the university in Neckargemund, or is that just where we could find a rental place?
That
or-
was, well, what happened was I went to there was an office at the university in Heidelberg that managed housing.
Okay.
Most universities have those. And they said, well, there's this place in Neckargemund, it's just down the road. Okay, we'll go look at it. We did, liked it, and we took it.
Mhm.
And they had it listed because it belonged to a member of the faculty
Oh, okay.
who was taking a year off to go to India. And his name was Stietenkroon, from
Mhm.
Stietenkroon. Yeah,
So we were there for a year.
we were there for a year. Yeah.
Now, was there some, now didn't Albert Speer, he was released from prison in 1969, didn't he live somewhere close by?
Yeah,
What was the
between
story?
Neckargemund and Heidelberg, there was another town,
Okay.
and he lived there.
Oh, he did.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of the town now.
You ever see him out in the yard gardening or anything?
No.
No? Okay. Interesting, yeah. And what was your experience like as a teacher in Heidelberg? Was it quite liberating, or?
No, I
No?
don't think so.
No?
It was, well, it was awkward. For one thing, I didn't really know the way they did things.
Oh, okay.
And, yeah, I got through all right. But I think the most important thing that happened while I was there was I went to a lecture and from Berlin, by the name of Klaus Holzkamp. When people were talking about him, he was quite a colorful figure.
Mhm.
And I didn't really understand the lecture, but there was a lot of discussion afterwards. And it was on critical psychology.
Mhm.
And I went back to my office at the university, and I shared that with a colleague who was a regular faculty member of the institute. And I remember him saying something about, oh, you went to hear Holzkamp. He says, I don't understand any of this stuff. He said, isn't all psychology critical? I said, I guess so. Anyway, that got me looking into critical psychology, and as soon as I discovered what it was about, I was very attracted to it. And actually, I mentioned it to Otfried when I got back, and he said, oh, I've got a book here. And it was called Kritische Psychologie, Vorbereitende Arbeiten. So I read it, and that was my real initiation into it. And
Was this written by
by
Klaus?
Holzkamp.
Oh, okay, yeah. And did it make sense, more sense than his lecture?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
okay.
yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that started, then at some point, when I went back to Berlin, I got in touch with him, and then I went to the inaugural meeting of the International Society for Theoretical Psychology in Plymouth, England.
Wow.
And I don't know when that was, 1980 something. And there I met Wolfgang Myers, who was a student
Yes.
of Holzkamp's, and we decided at that time that we should do a book, take some key articles, translate them, and publish them in English.
Mm-hmm.
And so we started on that, and that got published 1990, I think, by Cambridge University Press. And
It was a runaway hit.
well, I don't know. It was Yeah. At least it got me onto that track, and then a few years later, well, it would have been toward the end of the 80s, I was contacted by somebody who was in England. He was editing a series of books for Routledge on critical psychology,
Mhm.
and wanted me to write something on the German version.
Oh.
So I did that. And that was published in 1991.
Mhm.
And, yeah, then so whenever I was in Berlin, which was now getting more frequent because I was with Renata and her family was in Berlin.
Mhm.
I was visiting with Holtzkamp or Myers or somebody.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So coming back to the end of your experience in Heidelberg, you were obviously that year. Now with the sabbatical, is that an optional thing, or was it that every teacher was it mandatory that you take that?
No, it was optional.
Yeah. And then towards the end of that year, you knew you'd be coming back to UVic.
Yeah.
So you had to come back and then find a new place. How did that process roll out when you ended up getting Bracken?
When we got back, we actually stayed in, we didn't have anywhere to stay, of course, so we stayed in a motel
Right.
in Cordova Bay. Yeah.
Okay.
Uh,
That would have been in the summer of spring,
Yeah.
summer of '71.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
and then we found the place on Bracken and decided to take it
Mm-hmm.
and got moved in there.
Did you look at a lot of different places, or was that just one that popped out?
We didn't look at very many places. We looked at one on what's the street where the playground is? As you're going out from Bracken and you get.
Oh, Borden and
Borden.
McBriar? Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. And we looked at one over there, but, yeah. Actually, there was one in Oak Bay, which I liked, and your mother didn't.
Hmm.
So we didn't buy that.
Mhm.
She wanted something new.
Right.
And the place on Bracken had been lived in for a year, I think, by somebody. But it was pretty
It was pretty new.
new.
Yeah. Huh.